Okay, so it looks like that number is slowing down, so I'm happy to get started. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's presentation, Integrate Appflow with your CICD Pipeline. My name is Rachel, and I'm on the marketing team here. I'll be your moderator for today's event. And before getting started on the presentation, I'd like to go over some housekeeping notes for you. First, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email with a link to the recording and slides after the event is finished. So you will be able to revisit this content later on. It will also be hosted on our website, so you'll be able to find it there as well.
And that will also include, just to be clear, Nick has several links in new documentation we put together, new tutorials we put together associated with this webinar. So that will also get sent out to you.
Correct. We will include that in the email. Thanks for the reminder. Let's see. So I did already mention the presentation will be about 50 minutes, and then we'll use that remaining time to answer your questions. So please feel free to submit questions during the event. To do this, all you have to do is click on the Q&A icon on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can after the presentation. Additionally, if you have any technical issues or concerns, you can send me a message in that same Q&A box, and I'll message back to you directly. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. If you haven't met them before, I've got Nick Hyatt. He is the Director of Commercial Software Engineering at Ionic, and accompanying him is Matt Kramer, Director of Commercial Product Management at Ionic. So thank you both for being here. I'll pass it over to you for your presentation.
Thanks. Oh, and apparently I should have had that slide up when she was saying
that. All right, so I'm going to kick off and start today. So I'm Matt, helper on product here. Just for a little bit of a refresher, about 2 weeks ago, we had another webinar called Solving Mobile CI/CD with Appflow. If you go to ionicframework.com and click the resources tab at the top of the page, you can watch the recording of that webinar, yet again, Solving Mobile CI/CD with Appflow. In that webinar, we went through only using Appflow like as a base CI/CD product. This webinar is going to be a little bit different in that we are going to talk about utilizing Appflow to build or do live updates in your application using other CI/CD tools. So Jenkins, GitLab CI, GitHub Actions, and we'll be going over that in depth. So the first part of this presentation, when we talk about why is CI/CD important, the challenges with mobile CI/CD, that content I'm going to go through a little bit quickly just because we went through it in depth on the last time. So if you want that, content slowed down and more detail, feel free to check out that recording. Yet again, that's at ionicframework.com/resources. And then Nick is going to dive in and talk about specifically how Appflow helps sit next to those CI/CD services. And then our demo, I am super excited for. The demo is actually going to walk through setting up those services and utilizing Appflow inside of them. So you're going to get like 100% hands-on going through this demo and how to set those up. And there might even be a little surprise that Nick got in for this webinar in the form of a new public GitHub action as well. So I'll let him show that off later on in the demo.
Oh.
So first and foremost, mobile DevOps in general, I think, is about this culture of how do we ship more? How do we get feedback from our customers more? And really, when diving in to research this subject, we found the stat from Forrester talking about how the average team really only ships 4 times per year or less. That's like once a quarter. And if you're only shipping 4 times per year or less, that's a situation where your customers are also not receiving value kind of repetitively or iteratively over time. It also means if you're shipping out a feature and then not changing it for a period of 3 months, you might be missing out on that like critical feedback cycle where you could be making some awesome quick fixes right after a feature launch to make sure that there aren't any bugs or there are cool new feature releases. So just kind of blew my mind that people are shipping that slowly. So when we start talking about DevOps culture, really it is an actual culture, right? DevOps is the culture, continuous integration, continuous deployment or delivery is more on the tooling side. DevOps is more on the culture side. So when we look at this cycle of how do we start DevOps, start that culture in our organization, What we're really talking about is the process we go through together as a team. We start out by coding a feature, then we're going to build it, test it, release it, deploy it, and then we're going to monitor for feedback, both from, do we have bugs? Do we have customer feedback? What's going on? We're going to monitor those changes and use them to plan our next iterative cycle. And this DevOps culture here is kind of like this perfect world where it's like, yeah, Matt, I want to do all of these things in order. I want to make it super fast. But that's hard, right? Like if I have to go through and manually test everything, manually release it, only Joe over in, some other office knows how to deploy to production. You get in this situation where you have a lot of process kind of slowing you down, a lot of things you have to go through. So continuous integration, continuous delivery deployment is about automating that, about speeding up the feedback loops so that you can get better iteration for those features. Release faster because you don't have, a person that has to go click 20 buttons just to get a release out. You have this in this automated fashion, but it also helps to bring your team together. So if I'm programming a feature, someone else on my team is programming a feature, a third person is programming a feature, we're all working on separate pieces of the code. We want to be combining those and making sure everything works together very rapidly. That way we don't wind up in this situation where, hey, a ton of code changed. Now we're all trying to merge our code together. And we found 20 new things. I was planning on launching tomorrow and now I can't. But really the biggest bullet point here is if you're not shipping, you're not learning, right? The faster we can get things out, the faster we can learn from our customers than if we succeeded or failed at our objective and how we might be able to pivot and change to improve the things we really want to change for our customers. So we already hit on a few of these things, but a lot of things can get in the way of that process, right? If you're building on your own machines instead of a clean build environment, that happens to, be, hey, the works on my machine problem, right? Your machine has the specific set of dependencies that work and it works, but then one of your teammates tries to build it and it doesn't work on their machine. We try to fix that by having a build environment that is more stable and not an individual developer's machine, right? You also have the App Store approval processes. You're like, oh, hey, we shipped a bug to production. We got to fix that thing. We have to wait 2 days to hear back from Apple just to get that bug fixed out, right? We have stakeholders that need to help us go through the approval process. They need to green light or red light the changes we've made. Maybe that's even from a marketing perspective. Maybe it's from a technological perspective. Maybe your app has to go through a security pipeline to ensure that it adheres to security standards for your organization. And what really winds up happening too is you start finding these issues way later in the process than you want because you're probably running those checks manually before you're going to release instead of maybe a couple weeks before you're going to release in active development. So we went through and we perform a survey every year. So the Ionic Developer Survey, that's all a public survey that you can check out in I believe that's in our resources center as well. We looked at the Appflow user base and said, hey, people are utilizing Appflow for their native builds, for the live update service. How often are they shipping? And what we saw is they're shipping 3 to 4 times per week, and sometimes more in certain cases, right? Where they're using our live update service to send out updates really, really fast, maybe even multiple times a day to their end users. And they're using us for the native binaries to go straight to the App Store too. So overall, automating all of that just makes it very, very fast. So that's kind of CICD DevOps in a nutshell. I'm going to throw it over to Nick, who's going to talk about bringing this together with your existing stuff.
Yeah, so for those folks who come here already having the CI/CD pipeline in the works, right? We're talking, there's a lot of CI/CD tools out there today. There's Jenkins, GitLab, GitHub, just to name a few. All of which we'll go through a little bit today, but that's great. We love CI/CD. We think everyone should use it, and a lot of companies already are using those tools to build and release their APIs, to build and release other types of apps. But mobile CI/CD has some sort of unique challenges associated with it, and let's go through a little bit. So one thing, especially when you talk about hybrid apps, capacity or overtime apps, like one of the challenges is that a lot of these build tools, Jenkins or GitLab CI, if you're hosting them yourself, which a lot of customers are doing, you're going to have to manage the runners that run those jobs, and you're going to have to manage multiple operating systems, multiple servers. You're going to have to make sure the right versions of the Xcode and everything, all the tooling is installed. Sometimes apps require different versions of tools. You might have one app in-house that builds with Xcode 11 and one app that's been upgraded and can build with 12. And so you might have to go through the headache of, either having different build servers doing different builds for different people's apps, or forcing everyone to upgrade their apps so that they can work on 12, the same versions of the tooling. And then of course there's just, those tools are very powerful, but oftentimes they're require the user to understand how to do a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of scripting involved for example, deploying to the App Store, right? There's special scripts you're gonna have to write and manage. You kind of have to do all of that work yourself in terms of how to get the builds to work, run the command line tooling to do it, how to get the certs installed, how to get the things to deploy the App Store, the places you want to go. And it's just more tedious.
I think the big part there too is when you are creating these steps in your pipeline, right? That is how we think about a lot of this. When you look at CI/CD, we think about like, hey, step 1 is this, step 2, go run it through my security program, step 3 is deploy it to the App Store, step 4 is this, right? And that's how we think. That's how we want to write our CI/CD platforms, right? And when you look at like, hey, step 4 is deploy to the App Store, right? Is that just like, hey, go deploy to the App Store? Or is that this massive thing you have to maintain that in itself has 20 different steps, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about how Appflow can help with that. So some of Appflow's integrations with these tools in way of doing it basically gives you some advantages. So one, you can literally build your IPAs and APKs anywhere Node.js. So traditionally, if you wanted to get an IPA, you're gonna need a Mac server running Mac OS. You're gonna need Xcode installed and all that stuff. But since we basically you can farm out that portion of your build to Appflow itself, all you actually need to do is install our CLI, or as I'll show, our GitHub action, and basically you can run on any machine, whether it's a Windows machine or Linux machine or a Mac, doesn't matter. And you can build both your IPAs and your APKs in the same machine. So it simplifies the amount of servers you have to keep up, running, maintaining, and all the dependencies installed in each. You can basically, we have a bunch of scripts and dependencies predefined in each of our environments, and you can just run them with a single command. If you want to deploy to App Store, just add an additional flag to the command, add an argument to that option that allows you to do that. You can choose different operating systems and toolings. The new build stacks feature we've launched allows you to easily specify building with Xcode 11 on one app and building with Xcode 12 on a different app. If you need Xcode 12 because you added a app clip or something to your capacitor app, you can do that. Otherwise, you can stick with 11 for your older apps. And of course, publishing directly to the app stores is a pretty nice advantage too. You can do that easily from any of these tools as well. So let's just talk a little bit about like the things that are required and the things that you're going to manage from the CICD, right? So with generic tooling, you're going to have to either, depending on whether you're running these, you have on-premise sort of runners or you're using the cloud runners, no matter what, you're going to have to pick a version of Mac OS, pick a version of Linux. If you're running them on-premise, you're going to have to manage them. You're going to have to manage the Xcode version of the box, the CocoaPods, Carthage, Node.js, NPM, Gradle. You see the list goes on and on here. You have to manage that, and then you have to think every time, if I'm building multiple apps, does one app need a particular version? Does one app not need a particular version? And then, of course, all of the signing certificates installation, App Store credentials, deploy to the App Store, scripting, all that stuff. If you use the Appflow integration with Ionic CLI, that's really the only requirement. The Ionic CLI is a Node CLI, so you need Node.js that can be installed on whichever operating system you like, and you can just trigger the builds directly from the Ionic CLI. The builds will pipe the logs back to your system, and you'll see that in a minute. You'll be able to download the binaries, archive them as part of whatever your system does, and I'll walk through all that. So what does that give you? It gives you, not having to maintain as much build infrastructure in terms of Mac OS and Linux, whatever you might be serving these with. You don't need a Mac hardware. You don't need Mac servers in your, Jenkins build somewhere with an agent running on a Mac. You can scale on demand because Appflow does the scaling for you. Live updating, you also get the added benefits of skipping the app stores. There's CLI commands to ship live updates, push instant updates over the air. You get like beta previews in your users' hands. And then of course you can use our App Store publishing feature so that you can get your builds to upload directly to the app stores at the end of the day and test them. removes having to write that yourself, and just makes it easier to sort of configure in our UI. And of course, all of these, like I said, you can trigger from linking your GitHub, but you can also trigger directly from these other tools, and that's what I'm going to walk through today. You don't have to be an expert in Jenkins. It's pretty easy to configure some of this stuff. You can just trigger these builds directly from your CICD. So let's go ahead and walk through the demo. All right. So basically, the first thing I actually want to do, this is the Ionic dashboard. I'm actually going to start. I already have an application set up. This is an Ionic application. It's using Capacitor and Ionic React. And I'm kind of going to walk you through the basic gist of this, but I really just took the default tab starter and kind of did a couple of modifications to it. One, I use Capacitor to basically detect which platform I'm running on, and that will swap out whether this text over here says this website or IPA or APK. It'll say it was built by Appflow. And then I'm using an environment variable. These are the default environment variables with the create React app starter. So anything that has React _ app _ your custom app, like environment variable name, is going to be by create React app automatically sort of swapped out at build time in favor of whatever that environment variable was. So what I'm going to do here is in Appflow, I'm actually going to use an environment variable to figure out which sort of build system that triggered the build, and then I'm going to update the UI in the app accordingly. So I'll just give you a preview of what that actually looks like. The options are Jenkins. If we do Jenkins, I can see this website was built by Appflow, triggered by Jenkins. What else do we have? GitLab. You can see that this app was built by Appflow, triggered by GitLab. And Hub. Again, this app was built by Appflow, triggered by GitHub. And then this is just what I have for locally, which is CI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure this. I'm going to send it up to Appflow using these other build systems. And we're going to go ahead and look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here. This is the Appflow app. So I've already created this application. I've actually configured it. So I'm just going to walk you through what I actually did to configure this. So one of the first things I did was actually linked it to my application on GitHub. If you weren't connected already, you'd see the option to connect to GitHub. You'd have to auth, and then you could pick the repo from the list of repos that are shown. I already went through all that so that you don't have to. So basically, I linked it to GitHub. So the next thing I did was actually, I went ahead and created environment variables. This, if you remember from my code, is the thing that's going to customize that text I put, which is going to change the icon and change the text. So I created an environment for GitHub. I created one for GitLab, and I created one for Jenkins. And so if my builds use this environment, my app is going to be customized at build time to show the correct icon and the correct text. The next thing I did was I actually want to install all these binaries on a single device. So I created native configs. So native configs are a way of sort of customizing the native configuration for your application. So a couple things I did. One, I changed the bundle ID. I use Comda, use Appflow, GitHub, GitLab, and Jenkins for each of the builds. The configurations are named as such. So what this is going to do is change the bundle ID. This is the unique identifier for each application, so that when you install an app on your device, every app has a unique one of these registered with the App Store, and that's what allows them to be installed separately on devices. So changing that bundle ID is going to allow me to install this 3 versions of this app side by side on my device. I also, just for readability, updated the name on the fly so that the app is actually going to be Appflow plus GitHub plus GitLab plus Jenkins. That's going to customize the way each of those work. And then you can, if you like, I didn't do much customization over here, but you can change sort of the default channel name if you want that the live updates plugin is going to listen to. You can change the update method per channel, and all sorts of kind of configurations for that. I left mine pretty straightforward. It's just the auto configuration. The next thing you need to do, particularly for iOS, today I'm gonna do debug builds of Android, so they don't require any signing. But pretty much every iOS build type you do is going to require signing certificates and all that fun stuff. And so if you're not familiar with those, I created an iOS signing profile for GitHub, GitLab, and Jenkins. The basic building blocks of this, you can actually read more about them in our documentation and how to create these things, how to get them from Apple, download, install them. I'm not going to walk through that very much today. Matt walked through it in his last webinar, so if you wanted to see how that goes, you can go back to that. But I will walk you through the basics. I created a profile. I named it accordingly to the platform I'm going to use. The reason I had to create 3 was because that each provisioning profile contains the bundle ID. And since I'm using separate bundle IDs, I needed a separate provisioning profile. They actually all use the same certificate. So that way, they all share a certificate, but they all have a different provisioning profile so that I can install each on the device side by side. So that was those 3 that I have configured and set up. Yeah, so this is kind of the foundation, the groundwork. So I have everything kind of configured now, and all I really need to do is figure out a way of triggering builds. Now, in a normal setup, you could come over to this builds UI. You can click new build, select your commit, select all of this fun stuff from here, but that's how you build an Appflow. And we're talking about how you want to build inside of your pipeline. So one of the first things I want to talk about is basically we're going to use our Ionic CLI to sort of trigger some of these builds in Jenkins. So every system that we do is going to need to basically use a token for authentication. So the CLI allows you to specify an environment variable, and it will automatically use that token when authenticating. And that's what we're going to do in both Jenkins and GitLab CI. In GitHub Actions, you'll see that there's an input, and I'll walk through it. It's done a little differently. But either way, you're going to need to get the token. And so the easiest way to get the token is to run this command. There's documentation for that. But basically, if you're already logged in with the CLI, you can, if you're not, you can run Ionic login, you'll be logged in, and then you can just grab your token. And in this case, it'll print it out. So obviously, I modified things, so that's not a real token. But if you were logged in, it would actually be a real token. So the next sort of step that you're going to do after that is you're going to basically, we'll go over to Jenkins and we'll start. So one of the things I'm actually going to do here is I'm just going to, I added this image. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push this right now because I already have all the files in here required for both Jenkins, GitLab, and GitHub. This is actually when I push this up, I'm going to push it to GitHub, which is where my actual source repo is. But I also have a remote, which is a mirror for GitLab. I'm going to push it there as well. And that's going to go ahead and before I even get into some of this stuff, it's going to start triggering builds all over the place. I'm just going to do that because sometimes the builds take a while, and I hope for them to be done by the time we get to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And of course, my alias was incorrect. And then I'm going to push this first, my origin, which is GitHub. And then I'm going to push it as well to GitLab, just to kick off any builds over there. And what we're actually going to do in the meantime is we're going to go over to a Jenkins server that I've configured and running, and we're going to kind of look at what it would take to configure those. So let's go up, and this is an existing project that I have on Jenkins. Basically, if you wanted to create a new one, you could go in and say new Jenkins pipeline. I chose to use the sort of multi-branch pipeline. You can create a Jenkins file and basically design your pipeline in code. I already did that, so you would hit OK. At this point, you're going to be able to go in and sort of configure stuff. So It's going to use the Jenkins file for branches. I'm going to say go ahead and use GitHub. I've already configured some credentials. I'll walk through that in a second. So I'll let it use my credentials. This is my repo on GitHub. So I put it in the repo. I validate that it's real. It seems to be there. It exists. And then pretty much the rest of that, I'm just going to kind of leave this as default. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. So this is my new application. What it did is it scanned my repo. It looked for that existing sort of pipeline, and it will have basically kicked off some new builds as part of that. I'm actually going to get rid of some of these from some of the branches that it picked up. I'm just going to leave basically this master one. And you can kind of look through some of the steps, but right now while it's building, it's actually going to run my tests and do all this stuff. It's harder to see. So what I'm actually going to do at this point is I'm kind of going to go back up and I am going to show you what the pipeline looks when it's sort of done. One thing to note that I wanted to show off was that when I go to this configuration file, you'll see some notation and I'll try to remember to call it out. But basically, each system has a way of managing sort of secrets. So the way Jenkins does it is you manage credentials. And in my credentials, you can actually see up here, I have two stored. So I have an Ionic token and I have my GitHub token. And they're named. If you wanted to create a new one, I think you can just, oops, create a new item maybe. Oops, sorry. See, I'm not familiar as much with that. Now I can't remember how to find and create a new one. Oh, global credentials. Here we go, add credentials. So basically, when I added my credential, I picked that instead of using a password, I just used secret text. This is where I put my token. I named it, that's where the not a real token would go in here. I named it with the name I was going to use, and we'll look at that in my file momentarily. Let's go back to this Appflow Jenkins pipeline that I actually already have built, and we'll kind of go ahead and look. So this is a pipeline. This is what's going to be created from the other one. I'll come back to this momentarily, but I want to actually go over to the Jenkins file in the repo that this is basically configured from. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do that using GitHub, so I think it'll be a little easier to see. So here's the Jenkins file on GitHub. The basic pipeline I'm trying to build with every single one of these is actually going to be pretty much the same. I want to first run my tests. Second, I want to build iOS binaries, Android binaries, and the live update. And then I want to store any of the generated artifacts, such as my APK or my IPA. In Jenkins, the way in which you do this is, this pipeline syntax. So each one has this notion of sort of stages or different jobs that can be run. They're all kind of similar. So for one, this is where I'm calling out that I'm using that credential that I stored in the credentials area in my Ionic token for Jenkins. This is going to be what allows me to basically programmatically authenticate using the Ionic CLI. The second thing I'm going to call out here is that for each of these stages, I'm actually using this Docker image, which you can find over here, that I created that's linked to be built from our CLI. So this is tied to our CLI. It's using GitHub Container Registry, and it's basically a Docker image that uses Node LTS and installs the Ionic CLI. So it's pretty easy to use in a lot of these CI/CD systems. They tend to, for unification and simplification, use Docker to do a lot of this stuff. So that's what I'm actually running my sort of jobs in, is this Docker image. I'm putting the local directory into the application area. And basically, the first thing is going to run my npm CI and run my test. My second stage, my build stage, I'm going to run a few things in parallel. It's going to build Android. And again, I'm using that Docker image right here, you can see. But here's the only step I actually have to run in terms of Ionic, is Ionic package build Android debug. And then I specify the environment. And since I'm in Jenkins, I'm going to use that Jenkins environment that I named in the dashboard that you saw. I'm going to use the Jenkins native configuration. That's going to swap out the bundle ID and all that. And I'm going to change the file name here to be Jenkins, and Jenkins pipes in an environment variable that's going to be the build ID .apk. And then I'm going to use this built-in Jenkins function called archive artifacts to upload my APK at the end of the job. Build iOS is basically the same thing. The only difference is instead of building Android and debug, I'm going to build an iOS ad hoc build. And I'm going to use, again, the Jenkins environment, native config. And for this one, I'm going to need to use a security profile. And so I use the Jenkins. I also want to call out here that I am specifying this macOS 2020-09 build stack. If you go to the build stacks documentation, you can see that we have all sorts of build stacks you can use. So we have just this one for the Android builds currently, but several varieties for macOS builds. And each of them you can look and consider, like, what version of Xcode do I need? If you had multiple apps using multiple different kinds, like I said, you could put one app to use this one and one app to use this one. It'd be as simple as that. Here's the Cordova, Ionic CLI, Node, all the sort of major dependencies that you might be interested in understanding are going to be in here to help you figure out which image is best suited for your build. So let me go back to it. So I specified that, and then again, I specified the name of the file that it's going to download and output at the end of the day, and I archive the artifacts. And then the last one is the build live update. This one's pretty simple. You don't really need anything special. I just put in the Jenkins environment for this one. And again, use that Docker. So now I'm going to go ahead and just go back and see this is the output. So here's what my pipeline actually looked like from that whole declarative thing. You see the npm test stage, which relates to this right here, npm test stage. Then you can see the build stage, build Android, build iOS, build live update. And actually, if you look, if this were running live, you can actually see the logs from each one. So my tests here ran, they failed. I passed my one test, very well tested application. Build Android, you can actually see the logs from building. These are the logs that you're going to see piped back from Appflow into your system. If the job were to fail, like it did down here, you would see red and failed, and you would also be able to see the logs from those failures. Same thing for build iOS, and obviously for the live update. And then at the end of the day, what you have here is your artifacts being uploaded. So you can actually see that the APK and the IPA were uploaded, and I can go ahead and I can install these, save them. I'm going to save these two so that I can look at them on a device a little later. So that's basically the Jenkins configuration, and that's how it's going to integrate with Appflow. Let's go ahead and actually now start to look at our next system, which we're going to basically duplicate. And I'm going to go over ahead and go to GitLab. So this is my mirror of my application on GitLab. And actually, I find this a little easier to read. As we go on, I think it'll get progressively easier to read. Again, the GitLab way, they use a YAML file, but it's a pretty similar thing. And I like their UI a little better too, but basically, I'm specifying that this is going to run on that same Docker image, just for a nice, easy, consistent environment. The next thing, I define my stages at the top of it. So I have tests and build stages, and then when I define my jobs, apparently I duplicated the test one, I basically define them as part of the stage that they're in. So they specify what stage they belong to. And then you can see that all I do in my test stage is I run npm CI, npm test, just like I do over there. And the rest of it is pretty much all the same. Little different system for uploading artifacts, but pretty similar. If you look at the commands that I run for iOS, they're identical, except for that I've swapped out all the environments to say GitLab instead of saying GitHub. The one thing to note that's different over here is that the secret management is obviously going to be a little different. And again, the key aspect of being able to authenticate with the Ionic CLI is doing the secret. So In GitLab CI, you can go to settings, CICD, and you'll see variables. When you expand the variables, you can see that I piped this secret into the Ionic token environment variable. So that's what's allowing my Ionic token to authenticate. If I wanted to add a new one, this is kind of what the UI looks like. You can pick the name, pick the value, and then for the secret, I masked it so that it doesn't show, the token doesn't show up in the logs or something like that. But basically, it's as easy as configuring that. And then at the end of the day, what happens, if we go over to the CICD Pipelines tab, you can actually see, and here I actually have my running build that I did from earlier. So you can see a number of them that I have passed. All the ones that passed, I can see the artifacts over here. I'll go ahead and download these because I wanted to look at them later. So I'm going to save them to the same place. And we'll go ahead and actually, we'll go ahead and actually look at this pipeline. And what you see is that I'm actually running this runner on-prem, so it only has the ability to do one job at a time. My live update, if you go look at that, has already finished. Here's the logs in GitLab from my live update. The build iOS is actually still running. So here's the logs. If I really wanted to, I can sit here in GitLab and sort of watch them, pipe back logs. There's some more logs. It actually looks like it's getting pretty close to finishing. It's built the IPA and it's actually going to upload it. And then obviously, oops, that's the jobs view. This is the pipeline view. My tests actually ran and succeeded. And you can actually rerun any of these jobs if you want. Build Android is just kind of sitting here waiting for the build iOS job to finish. Once it's done, it's going to kick off that job. And once all of these are done, the whole pipeline will be marked green at the top level for success. Like I said, the artifacts in GitLab become available at this level. So I downloaded some of the artifacts. We'll go look at those and see them in a little bit. Let's see if there's anything I sort of missed in terms of the GitLab. They're all pretty similar. They work just a slight bit different. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to GitHub. So basically, GitHub, we're actually going to do a little different today because, which is pretty cool, I've actually built and released an official GitHub action. So I don't know if you're familiar with GitHub Actions, but GitHub Actions is the way to trigger builds and do CI and CD in GitHub. Their system is a little different actually than a lot of these other ones. They're similar, but they actually have a nice mechanism for sort of community sharing of different common actions and different things. So we've actually created an official Ionic team Appflow build GitHub action. The way in which you're going to get that Appflow token in there is going to be a little different than the other ones, using the special sort of secret syntax in Appflow, and I can walk through that momentarily. If you specify the Appflow ID, the platform, the environment, all in your workflow YAML file, and this is going to handle it all for yourself. And it's worth noting that the other two platforms I showed using the CLI, integrated with Jenkins and GitLab, are available in our scale plans. This GitHub action is actually available for all plans. So you're able to just go ahead and get started and try with this today. It can do basically the same things that the rest do. Trigger the builds, pipe them back, upload the artifacts to GitHub. And so let's just go ahead and walk through first the sort of syntax associated with GitHub, and then what it looks like. So GitHub is in nested place, so it's GitHub workflows, and then the workflow.yaml, the name of the workflow.yaml. It uses a .yaml again, and so the way in which these work is a similar sort of to the other ones. You can name what the workflow is going to be. You can take a rule. So this one is only going to build every time someone pushes to the master branch. And then you can define the various jobs within the workflow. So I've defined similarly the same set of jobs I did in the other ones. Here I'm actually using the GitHub checkout action to check out my code at the correct version for the commit I did. In this one, I actually set up my node environment because I want to run npm CI and test against this specific environment. And that's just a sort of standard GitHub action. But if you actually look, this is where I'm going to start using the official Appflow GitHub action. So I named this step build iOS with Appflow. I used our official Ionic Appflow build action. I piped in the secret from the GitHub secrets area, and I'll go show you how to do that momentarily. I set my app ID, I set the platform to iOS, the build ad hoc. So this looks a little different than using the CLI because it's not actually using the CLI, it's using an action. But I'm setting the environment, the native config, the certificate, the build stack, changing the file name here, and deciding what to upload the artifact as. I do the same thing for building Android, and the same thing for building iOS, building live updates. Building live updates, the platform is web, otherwise it's Android and iOS. The platforms are used to specify rules. So that's the syntax. So two things I want to show. First, I want to show you how to set this secret. The secrets are going to be set in the settings area of your application. Secret set. Pretty straightforward. You can see that I set this Ionic token 2 days ago. You can update it or remove it. If you create a new secret, you just name the secret and put the value. Now, this doesn't automatically pipe it into the environment variable like doing in GitLab did. What it actually does, you can see my jobs running there, is pipe it into their special contextual parsing language. And so what you can see is I'm actually using their special notation to sort of interpolate from the secrets.icon. It's going to pass this into my action argument. And that's how this action is going to authenticate with your token. And again, all those tokens, you remember back to the beginning when I showed you the Ionic CLI command for getting the token, that's how you're going to fetch those tokens so that you can use them. And I kind of showed you a sneak peek, but now if you come over here, what you see is I have this pipeline running. And so if I go into the pipeline, I'm going to see all my jobs over here. Build iOS is currently still running over there, but I have my test. I can look at the different steps that ran. This was the checkout. This was setting up the node environment. This was running npm CI. This was running npm test. They sort of break the logs out into nice little collapsible areas, which is handy. Build Android. This is the output from my build Android step. It's the same output you see with any of those Ionic CLI commands, all piped back into GitHub. Build live update, you'll see the same stuff. And if we go to build iOS, you could actually sit here and kind of wait to see exactly where it is in terms of this. And it looks like it's getting right to the end as well. So in here, for a pipeline that's already finished, you can actually go into the top level of the pipeline, and this is where you're going to see the artifacts that are uploaded by the action. So you can click iOS to download the iOS zip that's going to contain my file. You can download the Android zip. Going to see my APK. And let's go ahead. I think that was everything in terms of how you can set it, get bigger the GitHub action. And let's just go ahead and take a look at one of these binaries to start with. So this is my device. I have it running. I'm actually going to go ahead and take some of these binaries that I previously built and install them. So let's start with the first one I did, which was Jenkins. I'm actually going to go ahead and drop it in. This is going to install it on my device. If I go ahead and look at it, you'll see after it loads, that's the IPA, because it knows that I'm on iOS. It was built by Appflow, triggered by Jenkins. Awesome. If we go ahead and look at my, GitLab was the next one I did. We can put that on here. And why don't we go ahead and put GitHub on there for the picture as well. You can see that it's installing both of those. You can see the app names are different too, as I specified in my new config. So we looked at Jenkins. Let's go ahead and look at GitLab. We should see the GitLab icon triggered by GitLab. And for GitHub, we will see the GitHub icon. So there it is. Appflow built all the binaries. I use the native configs and the environment variables to get 3 apps side by side that are customized. One final thing we can do is, if you maybe noticed in my YAML file over here, in my workflow, I had another one which I called live update. So if I really want to ship a hotfix live to production, I can go ahead and do that. So what I'm actually going to do is just make a quick change and see if we can ship a live update as we're finishing up here. And so what do I want? I want to actually say that this live update is built by Appflow. And I added a new image here. Actually, I want to see this live update so I can make sure it's going to. I'm going to go ahead and delete some of this text. And say I'm going to go ahead and switch this image to this new Ionic logo, because I accidentally put the wrong logo in there. I'm going to get rid of any sort of unnecessary. And we'll see if this actually works. You should see a live update. And now I say the live update is built by Appflow, shipped by Ionic. I'm going to go ahead, add that. I'm going to check out a new branch because my action was listening for the hotfix change. I'm going to commit change icon update. Of course, I always get my analytics wrong. And I'm going to go ahead and get push origin master. Actually, I think I need to push this new branch. Not master. I need to actually push the branch that I just did. And if we go into GitHub, hopefully we will see that there's a new branch. The new branch actually triggered a workflow, so we can go into actions. And it triggered this Appflow live updates workflow. This thing is going to run in Appflow. It's going to do my live update. And actually, when I go back into the dashboard, I can see all these builds there. And we can go do that while this is running. I can see all of the builds. If I actually refresh this page, all of the builds that I triggered and ran today are going to be sitting here. And the current one that's running is running. I could, if I really wanted to, I could watch my build log from both Appflow as well as GitHub. But you'll see that all of my other builds over here are done running. And so when this build is done, I actually am going to go ahead and just deploy this live, and we'll see this should actually update all of my binaries, because they should all be listening to the production channel. And so I should no longer see sort of the different varying icons for the build servers. What I'll actually end up seeing is the newest update that I just shipped. And it just finished building, so it's uploading the binary. Once that's done, this will all change to success. We're done. I now have this deploy live updates button available in my build. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to pick the ship it live to production. I'm going to click deploy. It seems like it was happy with that. I'll double check in my deployments area. Yes, I have a live update. The deployment was successful. It's on production. If I actually look at my production channel, I can see that the active build was 702.9877, which was the build that I just deployed. And we should be able now, fingers crossed, to go back to our device, open the application, and we should actually be able to see the live update. That was the Jenkins one. This is the GitLab one. No longer will they have any of their icons, but they've all been updated to use the new UI. And there you go. One final thing I want to call out is that I didn't go through today what many people I expect will want to do, which is sort of finish off the deployment of those binaries to the App Store. I showed the live update, but you can also, using any of these systems, add a destination that would be an App Store. So had I created an App Store, put in my credentials for the App Store, I could have added a flag to those CLI commands and an argument to the GitHub action that would also then send a binary. Not only would it upload it to GitHub or Jenkins or GitLab, but it also send it directly to the App Store form with simply adding, like 7 extra characters or something to each of those commands rather than writing a bunch of scripts. I think that is everything I had for this demo. I'm going to go ahead and go back to present mode and finish up. So we have just some enterprise features that are available on the scale plans. So those third-party CI/CD integrations with Jenkins and GitLab CI that you saw using the CLI, those are available in our scale tier. The GitHub Actions is free for all. Obviously, if you want to do the iOS and the Android builds, you're going to need a launch plan or above. But to do live updates, you can do that on the free plan. iOS enterprises builds are also available on the scale plan, as well as SSO, advanced permissions, and just the ability to scale and ship live updates to millions of users. Matt, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. So yeah, just to reiterate that point, like if you wanted to go try some of this for free, just to like play with it and see what's up, I recommend starting out with the live update feature that Nick just showed off, and potentially combine that with like our GitHub action. Would be a really cool way just to kind of like see the flow for yourself without being on any of the paid plans. So that's pretty sweet thing to go play with. In terms of people utilizing Appflow today, a lot of our enterprise customers are on board and utilizing things like our live update service to get their bug fixes out as fast as possible, as well as in some circumstances the binary builds through automated CI/CD tooling like Jenkins, just like we showed off today. And then in terms of getting started, so the stuff Nick showed off is obviously, kind of our advanced automated tier. If you're just getting started and want to go check it out, feel free to go to useappflow.com. You can create an account there, play around. You can also use our new app wizard, our Getting Started Flow. If you don't even have an Ionic app, you can go use that wizard to get a new Ionic app and just kind of play around, get your feet wet. So with that, yeah, we can dive into some Q&A. So before we get started with the Q&A, yet again, the Q&A is a little tab in Zoom. So feel free to find that tab. You can send us a question and we'll try to get through as much as we can in the time remaining. So you still have time to get in a new question if you haven't sent one in yet.
All right, so I see one of the questions talking about basically the Ionic token, and if you log out of the CLI, does that invalidate the token? And is there a case where that could become invalid and break the CI/CD workflows? The answer is essentially yes, and so that's a good call out. I'm actually going to go, for what it's worth, there is an area in our documentation, a little cookbook down here, Jenkins, GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, and you can kind of see some of the demos of the files like I created today in the demo. But towards the bottom, it's going to talk a little bit about this token, and actually, I'm going to look at it over here a little bit. But the answer is, you can generate this token using a login, grabbing the token like I did. So if you continue using the CLI with that same token, just authenticating, that's going to actually, after about 10 days, invalidate the token, and you'll get refreshed with a new one. If you log out, that is also going to invalidate the token and break your CI/CD flow. So what we would actually suggest doing is then after you've copied those, you're going to go ahead and unset those tokens and just remove them from your config, and that token will then stay validated for you as long as.
Awesome. Yeah, and that new documentation, like Nick said, is available in the Appflow docs under Cookbook. We'll also send it out in the email after this, along with the recording of the webinar too. So thanks to Nick for putting together that awesome documentation to coincide with the webinar.
Yeah.
Let's see. There was some question on plans. I think we might have hit that already. So actually, there's a couple questions on plans. So let me give the broad overview one more time. If you want to go try the live update feature with the GitHub action, that is something that you could try for free today. If you would like to add native builds or deployments to that, you would need to be on one of our paid plans. And if you want to use this alongside kind of any of the more on-premise features, such as like Jenkins or things like that, that's the scale tier. So if you want to email sales@ionic.io, if you're like trying to get this onto an on-prem CICD that you manage in your business, feel free to shoot them an email and they can help you out with that.
Let's see, any minimum Ionic version requirements. So there is a minimum version of the Ionic CLI if you're triggering in Jenkins and GitLab CI, sorry. The minimum requirement for that is actually, I think it's going to be listed in our documentation somewhere over here, perhaps.
While you're looking it up too, like let me call out the the Ionic CLI and your version of Ionic are two completely separate things.
Yeah, that's a good call. I was gonna get to that. So I think the CLI you need at least 4.7. I would suggest being on. I added some stuff. You know, I was on 6.11.11. I'd always suggest being on the latest on Elite. The CLI is pretty backwards compatible with all versions of Ionic. So the version of the CLI is independent of that. So the answer is to trigger those things, you do need an CLI, but that is, like Matt pointed out, independent of whether you're on Ionic React, or Angular, or any sort of Ionic version, including Ionic 1. We have people building an Appflow doing this with Ionic and Angular JS, the original Ionic, and it still works. So we also have people not using Ionic, period, using capacitor apps with, you know, things that are not Ionic, using migrated phone gap apps that are just Cordova and they've never put in the Ionic UI stuff. So it's not the Ionic UI kit itself is not really related to the Appflow build feature.
Let's see. Somebody asked, does the GitHub action return a link to the generated artifact? So the GitHub action actually puts it right into GitHub as an artifact in the actions interface.
Yeah.
So if you have one of those built, we can show that.
Yeah. So basically, this was the one I had building my Android and iOS builds. And when I added this new image, what you'll see is it uploads these two artifacts, iOS and Android. Now, these are zip files. I kind of skipped over this, but I downloaded android.zip and ios.zip from GitHub. And if I actually unzip those files, android.zip, you'll see that that's the GitHub Appflow CI APK. And if I unzip my iOS, you actually see that's the GitHub Appflow CI IPA. Those are the artifacts there. There's sort of a million things you could kind of do if we actually go look at this thing. So the way that I uploaded it there was simply in my workflow. I actually just specified an argument here that said, upload the artifact in the name of what I'd like it uploaded as. You could actually leave this out, and this file will be sitting generated on this, you know, Ubuntu build stack, and you could continue to run additional steps. So there's an artifact action. There's probably actions for if you actually go to this GitHub marketplace. I think there's probably actions for you know, deploying it to Crash Analytics. Like any action you could think of, you could follow it up and take that binary and do any number of things you want.
And then later on, I do upload. Do I have the potential to come back to upload artifact? Or at that point, am I kind of outside and I'm using a different action?
You can do both. So upload artifact doesn't remove it. So you could upload it and then continue on. This binary is going to be sitting here in the home directory /home/GitHub, I think is what it's under. Or if you use the environment variable home, $home, you can use that. And then the file name that you named here, that's where this file is going to be sitting. So you can both upload it and then continue to use it in the next steps if you wanted to send it to an MDN or send it to wherever you want. And you can do that with all of the CI/CD systems. So the end goal doesn't have to be just uploading it to the artifact sort of destination for the particular CI/CD system. You could continue doing any number of things with that binary that you like.
Another question that we kind of half hit on, but just to reiterate, somebody asked, can Appflow be used to build or deploy non-Ionic apps? So the requirements for what we can build, deploy, live update are effectively that you use kind of one of the base like hybrid project types that we support. So if you're in Cordova or Capacitor, Cordova and Capacitor are both supported platforms in the Appflow ecosystem. So if you're using either of those, we don't care what web content is inside of those, right? So like Nick mentioned, if you're on like a super legacy Cordova app from like Backbone JS or something is running that, like that's totally fine. We only care about the shell being something we understand. So Capacitor and Cordova are supported. The internals are up to you and should work. There's one in there about what CI/CD tool do you prefer, Nick?
Well, it shifts. You know, I used to be a pretty big GitLab CI supporter. I like the YAML file syntax. I like that you can register your own runners and that it was integrated so well with the CI/CD system. There's also just a lot of nice features around that. But GitHub Actions is also pretty cool. So I don't know.
It's the new kid on the block.
It's the new kid. I like the fact that you can build and share actions. It kind of gives you more of an open source community type vibe for building CI/CD pipelines out. So that's nice.
Yeah, for what it's worth, Nick is more of an engineer than I am, but I've also been appreciating GitHub Actions just from the standpoint of it's cool for me to go in and sort of be like, oh, I just committed that. And I'm like, okay, cool. Here's the commit that like kicked off the build and everything is just kind of like in one place. So personally, that's been pretty sweet too.
Yeah.
But we see a ton of people with like way more complex setups utilizing the other platforms, right? Like if you wanted, an on-prem hosted, super customized, setup, we definitely see people using like Jenkins and other platforms like that. Cool. Well, I think we're a little bit over time already, so I think we kind of got through a majority of the questions here. But with that, I mean, I'd like to personally thank everybody for attending. I think this was fun. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Nick for one of the craziest live demos I think I have seen without catastrophic failure. So kudos to Nick for pulling that off. We'll send out the email with all the information, the recording, all the links we talked about today, and we'll also include a link to the last webinar we did, which was using Appflow effectively without other CI/CD tooling. So this has kind of been the second one in that pairing. But yeah, it's been great having you. Appreciate everybody's time.
Cheers.